Chapter 1. Begin in the Garden. Surrey, June 1938. The taxicab turned through the gates of Hargrove Park at 7:30 in the morning, and Poirot, who had been awake since 5:30 and had spent the intervening 2 hours in the specific state of alertness that a very particular kind of letter produces, sat forward in his seat and looked at what the gates revealed. The drive was a quarter of a mile of elm-lined gravel, and at its end the house rose in the early summer light with the composed authority of something that has been standing in the same place for 2 centuries and expects to stand for 2 more. It was Queen Anne, the original structure, with Georgian additions on the east wing and Victorian practicalities carefully managed. On the north, and it sat in its grounds with the quality of a building that has grown into its landscape rather than been imposed upon it. The gardens were visible from the drive, the formal parterre to the west, the kitchen gardens behind their old brick wall, and beyond the house, glimpsed through a gap in the yew hedge, the beginning of what Poirot knew from the estate's published accounts to be the famous sculpture garden. He had the letter in his breast pocket. He had been reading it at intervals since Inspector George Pell of the Surrey Constabulary had telephoned him at 5:15 with the news that Sir Edmund Hargrove had been found dead in his garden at 6 o'clock that morning, and that there was a letter at the dead man's solicitor's addressed to one Hercule Poirot, posted 6 days earlier, which the solicitors had forwarded upon hearing the news, and which had arrived with the improbable efficiency of a postal system that sometimes worked exactly as intended in the same morning delivery as the inspector's call. Poirot had read the letter. Then he had read the postscript. P.S. If you arrive and I am already dead, begin in the garden. He was already in the taxicab before he had finished reading it the second time. Inspector Pell met him at the front door, a lean, sandy-haired man of 45, with the weathered face of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors and the careful eyes of someone who had learned, through long experience, that what was outdoors was not always what it appeared. He had a decent, direct manner that Poirot appreciated, and he had the good professional sense, which Poirot appreciated even more, to begin with facts rather than theories. "Found at 6 by the head groundskeeper, a man named Briggs," said Pell as they walked through the house toward the garden door. "Face down on the gravel path, at the base of the large marble statue. The Diana, they call it. No visible wound. Local doctor said heart failure on preliminary examination. We'd have left it at that. Man of 72, warm night, a walk in the garden, but one of my constables noticed the hand." "The right hand," said Poirot. Pell glanced at him. "You've been briefed?" "I have been thinking," said Poirot. "Continue." "The right hand was outstretched on the gravel. 2 letters scratched in the loose stone, R and S." He pushed open the garden door. "We've been working on the assumption that he was naming someone." "But we can't find an RS in the household." They stepped into the morning garden. The sculpture garden of Hargrove Park was, Poirot reflected, everything its reputation had suggested and several things its reputation had not. The descriptions he had read, in catalogues, in cultural reviews, in the occasional newspaper feature that breathless journalists produced when they were granted access, had conveyed the density and quality of the collection. What they had not conveyed was the atmosphere, which was the atmosphere of a place where time had deposited beautiful things over 2 centuries, and then left them to arrange themselves into a relationship with each other that was entirely their own. Roman marbles, Renaissance bronzes, Georgian stone figures in their niches of clipped yew. 3 20th century works of dramatic modernity that looked in this context not out of place, but as though they had been there longest of all. And at the far end of the central path, on a raised plinth of Purbeck stone, the Diana. She was 16th century Italian marble. The catalogue date was 1541, attributed to a follower of Michelangelo, whose name had been lost, but whose skill had not. And she stood with her bow raised, and her gaze directed toward an invisible quarry, her carved drapery in permanent arrested motion. She had been in England since 1743. She had been the jewel of the Hargrove collection since the day she arrived. At her base, on the gravel path, a chalk outline marked where Sir Edmund Hargrove had been found. Poirot stood beside the outline for 4 minutes. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes moving, slowly, in the specific sequence that he had developed over 40 years, examining first the body's position, then the immediate surround, then the wider environment, then back to the detail that had been waiting for him to return to it. The chalk outline showed the right arm extended. The direction of extension was not, as Poirot noted immediately, toward the scratched letters. The direction of extension was past the letters, toward the base of the Diana statue. He looked at the scratched letters, then he looked at the base. He walked forward. He crouched, with the care of a man who has learned that his knees are not what they were, and he examined the eastern face of the Purbeck stone at ground level. At ground level, where no casual observer looking at a 600-pound marble statue would think to look, almost invisible against the stone's natural texture, a scratched arrow, pointing down. He did not scratch initials, Poirot thought. He scratched a direction, RS, right, stone. He straightened. He looked up at the Diana, at the marble goddess with her bow and her cold, focused gaze. "Inspector Pell," he said, "I need to look beneath this statue's base. Is there an estate surveyor or access to the original building records?" "There's an archive," said Pell. "The late Sir Edmund had an archivist working in it. Miss Ruth Sayer. She's been here 3 months." Poirot turned. "R.S.," he said quietly. Not a direction also, a person. 2 messages in 2 letters, because Sir Edmund Hargrove, in his last moments on the gravel of his own garden, had understood perfectly well that brevity was the only luxury the dying can afford, and had spent it with the precision of a man who, at 72, had never in his life said more than was necessary. "I should like to speak to Miss Sayer immediately," said Poirot, "and I should like something to assist in examining the cavity beneath this base, a long probe or a thin trowel." He looked at the Diana one more time. "Begin in the garden," he said, half to himself. "Yes, Sir Edmund, I have begun." Chapter 2. The Household at Hargrove. The family was assembled in the morning room by 9 o'clock. At Inspector Pell's request, a room that managed to be both comfortable and formal, in the specific manner of rooms that have been receiving difficult news for 200 years and have developed a suitable atmosphere for the purpose. Poirot sat to one side and observed, which was where he preferred to be in the first assembly, not directing, not questioning, but watching the specific grammar of a family's collective response to death, which always told him more than the individual responses that came later. Mrs. Constance Hargrove, the widow, was 65. She sat in the high-backed chair nearest the fireplace with the upright composure of a woman who has been trained, from girlhood. That composure is the first and most necessary response to any situation. Her grief was genuine, Poirot could see that. But it was grief of the ordered kind, already being managed, already being categorized and assigned to its correct proportion of her available inner life. She was watching her children with the specific attention of a woman whose primary instinct, even now, was protective. Philip Hargrove, the eldest son, was 42. He had his father's build, tall, square-shouldered, but not his father's stillness. He sat with the contained restlessness of a man whose body has more energy than his circumstances currently permitted to express. He had, Poirot noticed, placed himself between his mother and the door, which was either a protective instinct or the instinct of a man who is monitoring the exits, possibly both. Miss Dorothea Hargrove, the daughter, was 38, dark-haired, fine-featured, with the quality of someone who has spent a long time feeling things that are not entirely sanctioned by her surroundings and has developed, in consequence, a very well-constructed exterior. She was holding her mother's hand, and the hand-holding was genuine, but her eyes, when they moved toward the garden windows with a frequency and a quality that Poirot found instructive. Gerald Fenn, the estate manager, had placed himself at the far end of the room, slightly apart from the family, the correct position for a dependent employee at a family crisis, and one that he occupied with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 30 years finding the appropriate position in every room he entered. He was 55, compact, grey-haired, with hands that spoke of outdoor work and eyes that spoke of indoor calculation. He was very still. Dr. Aldous Vane, the personal physician, sat beside Gerald Fenn with the specific distress of a medical man whose patient has died in circumstances that reflect in some light on his management of that patient's health. He was 60, with the careful grooming of a Harley Street doctor operating somewhat south of Harley Street, and he spoke first, which was either confidence or nerves, and in Poirot's experience, the two were more often the same thing than people supposed. "I had examined Sir Edmund only last Thursday," said Dr. Vane, to nobody in particular, with the tone of someone establishing a record. "His cardiac function was, and I had some concerns. A man of his age with his history." "What concerns specifically?" said Poirot pleasantly. Vane looked at him. "The natural concerns one has when a patient of 72 shows certain markers. I had advised rest, reduced exertion." He paused. "A walk in the garden at night in the summer warmth." "At what hour did Sir Edmund typically take his evening walk?" said Poirot. Mrs. Hargrove answered. "After dinner, between 9:30 and 10. He had done it every summer evening for 30 years. He said the garden at night was the only time it was entirely his. No visitors, no staff, no obligations." She paused. "He loved the garden." "And last night? He took his walk as usual?" "As usual. I saw him go out at 9:45. I went to bed at 10:30. She looked at her hands. "He had not come in when I retired. I thought nothing of it. He sometimes stayed until 11. Poirot looked at Philip Hargrove. "And you? Were you in the house last evening?" "In my study, from about 9 until midnight." Philip's voice was level. "Working? Alone?" "Alone." Poirot looked at Dorothea. She had not yet spoken. She was still looking toward the garden with that quality in her eyes that he had been noting since he entered the room. "Miss Hargrove," he said. She turned. Her eyes were, at close examination, red at the edges, not the redness of recent crying, but the redness of a long night without sleep. "I was in my room," she said. "I heard nothing. I wish I had." This last sentence was delivered with a simplicity that was entirely unperformed, and it was, Poirot thought, the most honest statement he had heard so far in this room. He rose. "I should like to speak with each of you individually, in due course. I should also like to see Sir Edmund's study, and I should like, before anything else, to speak with Miss Ruth Sayer." "The archivist?" said Philip. Something moved in his face, quickly gone. "Why her?" "Because Sir Edmund hired her 6 months ago for a specific purpose," said Poirot. "And because people who spend 3 months reading 200 years of a family's private papers know a great deal. And because—" He paused, looking at Philip with the mild, steady gaze that tended to produce a specific quality of discomfort. "Sir Edmund apparently thought her name worth writing with his last strength." He went out of the morning room, and the silence that followed him was the particular silence of 5 people simultaneously reprocessing the same piece of information from 5 different angles. He found Miss Ruth Sayer in the archive. Chapter 3. What the Papers Knew. The Hargrove family archive occupied 2 rooms on the house's ground floor east wing, rooms originally designed as a secondary library, converted to their current purpose sometime in the late Victorian era, and apparently untouched since in any serious archival sense. They smelled of paper and dust, and the specific compound smell of old ink and aging leather that libraries produce when left to their own gradual processes for long enough. Ruth Sayer had imposed order on approximately 1/3 of the collection in 3 months, which represented, by Poirot's visual estimate, considerable effort. The boxes were labelled, the folders organised, the loose documents placed in acid-free sleeves with the methodical care of someone for whom preserving the material was as important as understanding it. She worked at a long table in the inner room, with a north-facing window that provided the flat, consistent light that archival work required, and that gave her, in Poirot's first impression, the quality of a figure in a Dutch interior, absorbed, precise, surrounded by the documents of other people's histories. She was 34, small, dark-haired, with a face that showed this morning the specific strain of someone who has received news of a death and is managing it alongside the knowledge that the death is connected to something she knows. She stood when Poirot entered, and she looked at him with the direct gaze of someone who has been expecting this particular conversation and has decided to have it honestly. "You know why I'm here," said Poirot. "Yes," she said. "He wrote your name in the gravel." "He wrote your initials in the gravel," said Poirot. RSI initially considered it a direction, right stone, indicating the hiding place beneath the Diana's base, but it was also your name. He left both, in 2 letters, because that was all the time he had, and he used it with extraordinary economy. Poirot sat down across from her at the long table. "Tell me what you found." She did not hesitate. Whatever internal negotiation she had been conducting since she heard the news had apparently concluded. And the conclusion was complete openness, delivered in the precise, misordered manner of someone who values accuracy above all other things. She had been hired by Sir Edmund in January to catalogue the archive, a task he described as 30 years overdue, which she had taken to mean that he was finally getting around to something he'd been meaning to do. Within 3 weeks, she had understood that it meant something different. He had not hired her to tidy the archive. He had hired her to read it. He wanted to know what was there, she said. He had a specific suspicion. He didn't tell me what it was initially. He told me to read everything from the 1890s onward and to bring him anything that struck me as unusual. He was very clear about what unusual meant in this context. He said, anything that involves an outside party, any transaction not reflected in the formal accounts, any correspondence that seems to have been kept separately from the main files. And you found the cross letters. She looked at him. How did you? Because Sir Edmund told you their significance, and because they are the most important thing you found, and because the most important things in archives are almost always letters. He paused. Tell me about Henry Cross. Henry Cross had been an understeward at Hargrove Park from 1903 to 1907. The official record, in the estate's employment book, which Ruth had found in the first week, described his departure as dismissal for misconduct, unspecified. The dismissal was dated September 1907. Cross had been 28 years old. What the official record did not contain, what had been kept separately in a box of personal correspondence belonging to Sir Edmund's father, to Sir George Hargrove, at the back of a shelf that had been sealed with a strip of brown paper at some point in the 1920s, was the correspondence between Sir George and Henry Cross between 1907 and 1910. The letters told a different story. In 1907, Henry Cross had been cataloguing the Sculpture Gardens pieces for an insurance valuation, the first such valuation in 15 years, and in the process of researching the provenance of 3 specific works, he had discovered something. The 3 pieces, a Renaissance bronze of Neptune, a 17th century Dutch marble relief, and a small Roman torso recovered from an Adriatic excavation, had been acquired in 1891 and 1892. The acquisition records showed purchase from a London dealer named Hoffman and Sons, but in the records of the Board of Trade for 1891, Cross had found that Hoffman and Sons had not sold those pieces. Hoffman and Sons had ceased to exist in March of 1891, when its principal, a German Jewish art dealer named Samuel Hoffman, had been bankrupted by a coordinated legal action brought by 3 of his creditors whose financial backing Cross had subsequently traced through considerable ingenuity derived from a single source, a private account managed on behalf of Sir George Hargrove. Samuel Hoffman had been bankrupted deliberately by the man who then purchased his collection's finest pieces through a nominee buyer at a fraction of their value. Henry Cross had brought this finding to Sir George. The subsequent correspondence showed the management of the situation, a payment to Cross, his dismissal, his permanent silence, purchased, the letters made clear, with the threat of consequences that Cross found persuasive. Sir George Hargrove had obtained 3 of his finest sculptures through an act of deliberate financial destruction perpetrated against their legal owner. "Sir Edmund had not known," said Ruth. "I'm certain of that. He was 9 years old in 1891. When I showed him the letters, his response was—" She paused, selecting the word carefully. "It was the response of a man to whom a lifelong assumption about his family has just been removed." She looked at her hands. "He sat with the letters for a long time, and then he said, 'I need to think about what to do.' And then he wrote to you." 6 days ago, said Poirot, "which means he spent approximately 3 weeks thinking about what to do." "Yes." "And in those 3 weeks, I think someone became aware that he was thinking about something, that something had changed in him." She looked up. "He was different in those weeks, more watchful, less settled." "He wrote to me that he had the sensation of being watched," said Poirot. "Yes," said Ruth, "I think he was right." Poirot looked at the archive around him, the boxes, the folders, the 200 years of a family's accumulation of paper and record and correspondence. All of it had been sitting here, quiet and unconsulted, for decades. And then a woman with careful hands and methodical attention had begun to read it. "Miss Sayer," he said, "the letters from Cross. Where are they now? I gave them to Sir Edmund 3 weeks ago. He said he would keep them in his study." She paused. "I made copies. I always make copies before returning originals. The copies are here." She pointed to a folder on the table. "I had a feeling, I can't explain it rationally, that keeping a copy was the correct precaution." Poirot looked at her. "It was entirely rational," he said, "and entirely correct." He took the folder. He held it with the specific care of a man who understands that he is holding the reason why 2 people are dead, one of them already, and the other, though he did not yet know it, already in danger. Chapter 4. Beneath the Diana. The estate surveyor's records for Hargrove Park, kept in the estate office in an oak cabinet of the kind that Victorian land agents regarded as practically fireproof, contained among their contents a survey of 1891 that documented, in the meticulous hand of the surveyor's assistant, every structural feature of the grounds, including the drainage systems beneath the principal garden paths. Poirot sat with this document at a garden table while a young constable from Inspector Pell's team worked carefully at the base of the Diana statue with a long metal probe and a garden trowel. It was 10:30 in the morning. The garden was very still. The summer light fell across the gravel paths and the stone figures with the indifferent beauty of a day that has no interest in what it illuminates. The 1891 survey noted, in the section dealing with the sculpture garden's central path, beneath the principal plinth of the Diana figure at the eastern foundation, an original drainage channel of 17th century construction, approximately 9 inches in diameter, now sealed with mortar. Approximately 3 feet in depth, sealed with mortar. But the mortar, Poirot had noticed when he examined the stone at ground level, was not 300-year-old mortar. It was newer, considerably newer. "There's a cavity," said the constable, withdrawing his probe. "The mortar's been broken up here. Look, you can see it's been repointed recently. The stone behind it gives way." Pell was there in 60 seconds. The cavity, a smooth-sided channel of the original stonework, running 9 inches wide and 3 feet deep, contained, set on a narrow shelf of stone approximately 12 inches from the base, a tin box of the kind used for tobacco in the 1890s, its lid rusted but intact. Pell opened it with the care of a man who has learned that care is always worth the additional 30 seconds. Inside, a single folded document, written on the heavy cream paper that legal correspondents used before the war, the previous war, the one before. The ink was brown with age. The handwriting was formal, the penmanship of someone who had been educated in a century that took penmanship seriously. Pell read it. Then he handed it to Poirot. The document was a private agreement dated the 14th of March 1901 and signed by Sir George Hargrove. It was addressed to a Thomas Fenn, Gerald Fenn's father, who had been estate manager before him, and it granted to the Fenn family, in perpetuity, a share of 2.5% of the Hargrove estate's net annual income, in recognition of services rendered to the Hargrove family in the years 1891 and 1892, the nature of which services was described only as matters of the late Mr. Samuel Hoffman's estate. The nature of those services was not specified. It did not need to be. Poirot folded the document and handed it back to Pell. "Gerald Fenn has not been falsifying the accounts," said Poirot. "He has been collecting a debt owed to his family since 1901, established by this document, for services rendered in the deliberate ruination of Samuel Hoffman." He paused. "Sir Edmund recently discovered the existence of this agreement, probably through the cross letters, which reference the Fenn family's involvement in the 1891 acquisition. He confronted Fenn. He determined to dispute the claim, or to make the entire matter public." "Which would have exposed Fenn's family history along with the Hargroves," said Pell. "Yes."
And Fenn had a second reason, a more immediate reason, to want the matter buried. Poirot looked at the tin box. If Sir Edmund had gone public with the provenance of those sculptures, the investigation that followed would have gone exactly here. To this box, to Thomas Fenn's signature on this document, to the specific nature of the services Thomas Fenn had rendered. He paused. Gerald Fenn has spent his entire career managing this estate in the knowledge that his family's position here is built on an act his father helped commit against a man who had done nothing wrong except own something that someone else wanted. Pell was quiet for a moment. So Fenn had reason to want Sir Edmund stopped. Fenn had reason. Others also had reason. This is not a simple case. Inspector. Poirot looked at the Diana above them, the marble goddess with her cold, focused gaze, standing on the stone that had hidden this document for decades. Sir Edmund put this here himself, not recently. Look at the patina on the box, the quality of the rust. He put it here years ago as insurance. He knew from the moment he read the cross letters that he needed evidence that would survive his death. He knew who his enemies were. He knew someone might kill him. He suspected that his discovery had become known and that it had created a danger. He took precautions. This document, the letter to me, the message in the gravel. Poirot looked at the path. He was a thorough man. The precautions were, in the end, sufficient. We have what we need. He paused. We have what we need to understand the motive.
What we still need is the method and the proof. He walked back toward the house, and as he walked, he was already thinking about Dr. Aldous Vane, and about chloral hydrate, and about who, in this household, had known Sir Edmund's habits well enough to insert something into the sequence of a nightly routine that had not varied in 30 years. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Accounts. Dr. Aldous Vane's consulting room in the village of Hargrove St. Mary was the kind of consulting room that served as evidence of its own competence. The degrees on the wall in their dark frames, the instruments on their trays, the desk clear except for the current patient file. The room said, "I am orderly, I am professional, I am reliable." Poirot sat across from Dr. Vane and looked at the room with the attention of a man reading a text. And what he read was not entirely consistent with what the room intended to say. The degrees were from Edinburgh and Guy's Hospital, genuine, well-placed, appropriate. But the photograph on the far wall, a group photograph of a shooting party, 8 men with guns dated in the margin as 1934, showed among the 8 both Dr. Aldous Vane and Mr. Philip Hargrove standing side by side with the comfortable proximity of men who are considerably more than professional acquaintances. Poirot had noted this before he sat down. "You attended Sir Edmund on Thursday," said Poirot, 5 days before his death. You described his cardiac function as a concern. What specifically concerned you? "Arrhythmia," said Vane. "Irregular pulse, some shortness of breath on exertion." He paused. He was 72. "These things are not unexpected. And you prescribed?" "A continuation of his existing digitalis regime, rest, reduced exertion." He paused. I told him to avoid the late evening walks in the garden, the night air, the exertion. He did not follow this advice. He was not a man who followed advice he found inconvenient, said Vane. He was, in my long experience of treating him, a man of considerable willfulness. Yes, said Poirot. I have formed that impression. He looked at Vane steadily. You have been treating Sir Edmund for 11 years, since 1927. And in those 11 years, your assessment of his mental capacity, his, shall we say, cognitive function, has it changed? Something in Vane's face shifted, very slightly. But Poirot had been looking at the exact spot where shifts occur in faces, and he saw it. Oh, he was sharp, said Vane carefully. As sharp as he'd ever been, in my opinion. In your opinion, said Poirot. But in your records. I ask because I have spent some time this morning with the estate's correspondence files, and I find 3 letters in the past 18 months. One to Mrs. Hargrove, one to Philip Hargrove, and one to the family solicitors, in which you described Sir Edmund as showing signs of, variously, confusion, memory impairment, and difficulty with complex decision-making. He paused. The letters are inconsistent with your current description. A silence. The specific kind of silence in which a man is determining which version of events has the better survival odds. Medical assessments are interpretive, said Vane. Yes, said Poirot. They are. And a particular interpretation, you communicated over 18 months to the family and the solicitors, would establish the foundation for a legal finding of incompetence, which would transfer control of the estate from Sir Edmund to Philip Hargrove. He watched Vane. Philip Hargrove, who has been in considerable financial difficulty for the past 3 years. Philip Hargrove, who was refused money by his father on at least 2 occasions in the past 18 months. Philip Hargrove, whose photograph stands on your wall in the company of a shooting party dated 1934. Poirot's tone was perfectly pleasant throughout. I am not yet certain exactly what the arrangement between you and Philip Hargrove is, Dr. Vane. But I am certain that it exists. Vane said nothing. His hands on the desk were entirely still, the stillness of conscious control.
Chloral hydrate, said Poirot. A sedative, colourless, essentially tasteless and flavoured liquid, administered in sufficient quantity to a man already taking digitalis. What would the likely effect be? The doctor's stillness deepened. That would depend on the dose. A substantial dose. Not enough to produce immediate fatality, but enough to produce dizziness, unsteadiness, a cardiac event in a man with pre-existing arrhythmia who is walking alone on a gravel path at night. Theoretically, said Vane. His voice had become very careful, very flat. Theoretically, such a dose could produce those effects. Yes, said Poirot. He rose. Inspector Pell will be here within the hour. I should advise you, Dr. Vane, to have whatever you intend to say prepared by the time he arrives. He picked up his hat.
I would also advise completeness. The question at this point is not whether the facts will come out. They will come out. But whether you came to understand, at some point in the proceedings, that what was being done was wrong, and whether you have the capacity to say so clearly. He went out. Behind him, the orderly consulting room sat in its evidence of competence, and the gap between what it said and what it was took up all the available space. Chapter 6. The Fenn Family Debt. Gerald Fenn was in the East Field when Poirot found him, inspecting a drainage issue in the company of 2 estate workers, with the concentrated professional attention of a man for whom the practical management of 300 acres has always been a more comfortable territory than the management of people.
He sent the workers away when he saw Poirot coming. He did not attempt to be somewhere else, which Poirot noted as a point in his favour. Whatever kind of man Gerald Fenn was, he was not a man who ran. They stood at the edge of the field in the June warmth, with the estate spread around them, the house visible at a distance, the formal gardens, the yew hedges, the kitchen garden's brick walls. The landscape of a family that had occupied this ground for 2 centuries, and of a family that had served it for almost as long. Your father worked here for 30 years, said Poirot. 34 years, said Fenn. Started under Sir George in 1887, retired in 1921. I came up through the estate myself, started at 16 as a junior, took the manager's position when father retired. A family tradition, said Poirot. The Fens have managed Hargrove since the Fens were worth employing, said Fenn, with a flatness that was neither pride nor bitterness, but something more complicated. The 1901 agreement, said Poirot. Fenn looked at the field, his jaw set. Found it, did you? Beneath the Diana. Sir Edmund put it there, I believe, as insurance. The question in my mind, and tell me if I am wrong, is whether Sir Edmund put it there to protect himself or to protect you. Fenn looked at him sharply. Because, said Poirot, the document establishes your family's legal claim to the 2.5% share. Without it, Sir Edmund could dispute the arrangement and leave you with nothing. With it, your position is documented. Whatever the moral character of the underlying transaction. He paused.
Sir Edmund hid that document beneath the statue where you, knowing the gardens as well as you know them, could presumably find it. Not to destroy it, to preserve it. As though he had some ambivalence about the situation that went beyond simple resolution. Fenn was quiet for a long time. Around them, the estate conducted its summer business. Birds, distant machinery, the smell of cut grass. He found out about father's involvement 3 months ago, Fenn said finally. When the archivist found the cross letters, he came to me directly. He was not unkind about it. He said he needed to understand what father had done and why. He stopped. Father was not a wicked man. He did what Sir George asked him to do because Sir George asked him to do it.
And because the Fenn family's position on this estate depended entirely on the goodwill of the Hargroves, and because in 1891 an employee did not refuse what an employer requested, regardless of whether it was right. He paused. Father knew it was wrong. The 1901 agreement, Sir George offered it. It wasn't demanded. I think Sir George felt guilty. And Sir Edmund, when he understood the full history, he said he intended to make the matter right. Return the sculptures, find the Hoffman family, whoever remained, and return what his grandfather had taken. Fenn looked at his hands. He asked me to cooperate with the disclosure. He said the Fenn family's involvement would be part of the record, but that he would make clear my father had been acting under instruction. And you agreed? I agreed. Fenn's voice was steady. Well, I told him I would cooperate fully. I had no objection to the truth coming out. I have been carrying the knowledge of what father did for 20 years, since he told me on his deathbed. I have been collecting that 2.5% for 20 years, knowing what it represented. He paused. It is not comfortable knowledge. If Sir Edmund wanted to bring it into the light, I considered that was his right. Poirot looked at him. And yet Sir Edmund is dead. And yet Sir Edmund is dead, Fenn repeated. He looked at the field. Not by my hand, Monsieur Poirot. I had no reason to want him dead. He was the one person in this estate who knew the truth about my family and was prepared to handle it with some decency. A pause. Whoever killed him, they had a different kind of reason. They were afraid of the disclosure itself, not of the past. They were afraid of what publication meant for them now. Poirot nodded slowly. He had been, he reflected, in the process of confirming what he already suspected about Gerald Fenn. That he was a man who had been carrying a weight for 20 years and had, in the clarity of Sir Edmund's straightforward approach to the situation, felt something like relief. He thought about the chloral hydrate. He thought about Mrs. Agnes Webb, who had prepared Sir Edmund's evening drink for 30 years and who had been given a compound to add to it on the instruction of his own physician. And he thought about Philip Hargrove, who had sat in the morning room with his eyes on the exits and his jaw set against everything that might come in through the door. "Mr. Fenn," he said.
On the night Sir Edmund died, did you see Philip Hargrove in the garden or near it? Fenn looked at him directly. At 9:15, he said, I was walking the perimeter path, my habit on fine evenings, to check the locks on the outbuildings. I saw Philip Hargrove coming from the direction of the kitchen garden. He was carrying something, a small bottle, I think. I thought nothing of it at the time. Thank you, said Poirot. He walked back toward the house with the measured pace of a man who now has most of what he needs and is organizing it into the correct sequence, because the correct sequence, the order in which things are understood, was, in Poirot's experience, at least as important as the things themselves. Chapter 7. The Pond. On the morning of the fourth day, at 7:20, as a housemaid coming through the east garden to collect herbs from the kitchen garden border stopped at the ornamental pond and screamed. The pond was a formal feature of the east garden, oval, surrounded by a low stone rim, perhaps 30 feet at its longest point, and deep at the center in the manner of ponds that have been filled from a natural spring rather than rain. Water lilies floated on the surface. The morning light touched them very quietly. Ruth Sayer was at the bottom. She had been there for some hours. The pond temperature was not cold enough to determine the time precisely, but the state of the water around her when she was brought to the surface suggested that she had been there since evening. Since, the surgeon estimated, approximately 9 o'clock the previous night. On the gravel path beside the pond, a leather-bound notebook opened to its most recent entry. The entry was in Ruth Sayer's small, precise handwriting. It read, "P.H. came to the archive this evening, asked to see the cross letters. I told him I had given everything to Poirot. He said..." The entry ended. Poirot stood beside the pond for a long time. Pell stood beside him. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, which was in itself a form of acknowledgement. "She couldn't swim," said Pell finally. "The housekeeper told me. Miss Sayer mentioned it in her first week when someone suggested a boat on the lake. Said she'd never learned." "She did not fall," said Poirot. "The path is dry. The stone rim is 18 inches high. Too high for an accidental overbalance without a stumble. And there is no evidence of a stumble on the path." He looked at the notebook. "She had time to write. She heard him coming, perhaps. She wrote quickly, as much as she could, in the hope that..." He stopped. "She knew," said Pell quietly. "She was a very intelligent woman," said Poirot. "She knew what had been done to Sir Edmund. She knew what the letters represented. And when Philip Hargrove came to the archive and asked for the cross letters, she knew immediately what that request meant." He picked up the notebook carefully with his handkerchief and read the last entry once more. "She told him she had given everything to me. She hoped, I think, that this information would stop him. That if the evidence was already in safe hands, there was no purpose in silencing her. But he didn't stop. He could not afford to stop. His name was in that notebook, which he did not know she was writing. He saw that she had been writing as he arrived. He needed to ensure that whatever she had written did not survive." Poirot closed the notebook. He did not check the notebook carefully enough in the dark. He pushed her into the pond and left the notebook where it lay, assuming it was empty or contained only professional notes. He paused. It was a hurried act, a frightened act. Philip Hargrove, when he came to that pond, was a man who had been watching his position collapse for 4 days and had made a desperate decision. Pell looked at the water, at the lily pads floating in the morning light, at the peaceful surface of a place where something terrible had happened. "She was trying to help him," said Pell. "Sir Edmund. She spent 3 months in that archive trying to help him understand his own family's history. She gave him the truth. And then she died because she had done exactly what she was hired to do," said Poirot. His voice was very quiet. "Yes, that is precisely correct." He turned away from the pond. He walked back along the east garden path, past the rose borders and the sundial, and the gate in the brick wall that led to the kitchen garden, and his face had the expression that Pell, who had known him for 4 days and had formed a considerable respect for him in those 4 days, recognized as the expression of a man in whom something has moved from professional engagement to something older and less manageable. "Today," said Poirot, as Pell fell into step beside him.
"Today we finish this. Philip Hargrove, Gerald Fenn and Dr. Aldous Vane, 3 men with 3 different roles in what happened to Sir Edmund, and 1 man alone for what happened to Ruth Sayer." He walked steadily toward the house. "I should like the long gallery prepared." All members of the household and the relevant persons. 7 o'clock this evening. Pell nodded. He sent his constable ahead to make the arrangements, and the East Garden in the June morning returned to its summer business. The bees in the lavender, the birds in the yew hedges, the stone rim of the pond still damp where they had worked at its edge, and said nothing about what it had seen, because gardens, unlike people, have the luxury of perfect silence.
Chapter 8. The Long Gallery. The Long Gallery of Hargrove Park ran the entire length of the first floor's south elevation. 90 feet of oak-panelled walls hung with portraits of Hargroves going back to the year of the gallery's construction, 1683, each one looking out from their painted world with the composed authority of people who had no doubt that the room would still be here when every current occupant was gone. At 7 o'clock on the evening of the fourth day, the room held a different assembly than those portraits had typically witnessed. No candlelight dinner, no formal reception, no celebration of an inheritance assumed or a marriage arranged. Just 8 living people, the household of Hargrove Park and its attached professionals, and one Belgian detective standing in the evening light at the gallery's end, with the tall south windows behind him and, visible through those windows, the garden below. The Diana was visible in the fading light. She looked up at the gallery windows with her cold marble gaze. Poirot spoke. Sir Edmund Hargrove died in this garden on the night of the 13th of June. He did not die of heart failure, although heart failure was the immediate cause of death. He died because someone had administered chloral hydrate to his evening drink, a sedative that interacted with his existing cardiac medication to produce the dizziness that caused his fall, and the fall that caused the cardiac event that ended his life. He paused. This was not an impulsive act. It required access to his nightly routine, a compound available only through medical channels, and the cooperation, whether knowing or unknowing,
of the person who prepared his drink each evening. He looked at Agnes Webb, who sat in her chair with her hands flat on her lap, and the specific expression of someone who has been told, over the past 24 hours, a sequence of things that have fundamentally altered her understanding of the past 3 weeks of her life. Mrs. Webb prepared Sir Edmund's evening drink every night for 30 years. She did so on the night of the 13th exactly as she always had, except that on that night, and on the 14 nights before it, a small quantity of a compound had been added to the flavoured water she used, which she had been told by Dr. Aldous Vane was a sleeping aid, prescribed for Sir Edmund's recent difficulty sleeping, to be added to his drink before he took his walk. Poirot looked at Agnes Webb. Mrs. Webb was entirely innocent. She administered what she was told was medicine by a man she had every reason to trust. She is not responsible for what that medicine was. Agnes Webb closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Dr. Vane provided the chloral hydrate, said Poirot, turning to the doctor, who sat stiffly in his chair with the expression of a man who has been in a small room with the truth for 24 hours and is exhausted by it. He provided it because he had been paid for 3 years by Philip Hargrove to build a medical case for declaring Sir Edmund incompetent, a case that would have transferred control of the estate to Philip and resolved the financial difficulties that Philip had been managing with decreasing success since 1935. He paused.
When Sir Edmund's discovery of the Hoffman provenance threatened to create a public scandal that would make the estate worthless and any sale impossible, Philip concluded that the incompetency case was no longer sufficient. He needed Sir Edmund removed, not managed. He told Fenn, he instructed Vane, and the three of them, with different degrees of intention, different levels of culpability, arranged the method by which Sir Edmund would take his evening walk and not return. Gerald Fenn was very still. Fenn, said Poirot, contributed the plan and the specific knowledge of how and when to administer the compound for maximum effect. He did not wish Sir Edmund dead, I believe that is true. He wished Sir Edmund prevented from acting on his discovery. He told himself there was a difference. There is not. Fenn looked at the floor.
Philip Hargrove, said Poirot, knew from the beginning what the plan meant. He financed it. He approved it. He was at the garden at 9:15 on the night of the 13th, walking toward the kitchen garden with a small bottle, seen by Gerald Fenn, who mentioned it to me when I asked. Philip had gone very pale. He was ensuring the plan was in motion. Poirot's voice did not change in tone. And 4 days later, Philip Hargrove went to the archive, asked Ruth Sayer for the cross letters, and when she told him that the letters were already in my possession, he walked with her to the ornamental pond in the east garden and did what he did. The gallery was entirely silent. Outside, the last light of the June evening lay across the sculpture garden, and the Diana stood in it with her bow raised. "Ruth Sayer," said Poirot, "spent 3 months in this archive reading the history of this family for the purpose of helping Sir Edmund understand it. She found what she found. She told him. She made copies, which she gave me. She wrote the notebook entry that names Philip Hargrove. She did everything correctly, and she is dead." A pause. "I want that to be part of this record, not as sentiment, but as fact." He looked at Pell. Pell nodded to his constables. Philip Hargrove did not move when they came toward him. He sat in his chair with the expression of a man who has arrived at the end of a long corridor and found at the end of it exactly what he had been trying to avoid. Dr. Vane stood as they reached him, which was either an act of dignity or of automatic reflex, possibly both. Gerald Fenn rose with a slowness that spoke of a man putting down something heavy. He looked at Poirot for a moment before the constable took his arm. He looked like a man who is not entirely certain whether the thing he has put down was a burden or a support, and who does not yet know how it will feel to stand without it. Outside, the garden received the evening's last light. The Diana looked up at the gallery windows. Poirot looked back at her. He was, he reflected, beginning to understand what Sir Edmund had meant about the garden at night. There was a quality to it, in the stillness, in the old stone, in the way the last light moved, that was entirely its own, and that had nothing to do with who owned it or what lay buried in it. It was simply the garden. That, he supposed, was what had made it worth protecting. Chapter 9. What Remains. The legal proceedings that followed the arrests at Hargrove Park were, as legal proceedings always are, slower than the events that necessitated them, and more complicated than the facts warranted. Philip Hargrove was charged with the murder of Ruth Sayer and as a principal in the conspiracy against his father. Dr. Aldous Vane was charged as co-conspirator and struck from the medical register within a month of the arrest, the professional process moving in this instance considerably faster than the criminal one. Gerald Fenn was charged as co-conspirator and remanded, and his case acquired, in the press coverage that attended the whole affair, the specific quality of a man whose guilt was entangled with circumstances that the public found genuinely difficult to apportion. Poirot followed the proceedings from London, consulted by Pell at intervals, and did not return to Hargrove Park until August, 2 months after the June morning when he had stepped out of the taxicab and walked up the elm-lined drive and found the Diana. He returned because Constance Hargrove wrote to him. The letter was brief. It said that the house had been considerably quieter since June, and that she had found herself thinking about certain conversations that had not taken place, and that perhaps should have, and that if Poirot found himself in Surrey in the coming weeks, she would be grateful for an hour of his time. He found her in the garden, not the sculpture garden, but the kitchen garden, in a straw hat, doing something purposeful with a climbing rose that had exceeded its remit. She received him with the composed practicality of a woman who has spent 2 months reordering the architecture of her life and has found, to her moderate surprise, that she is more capable of the task than she expected. They sat in the garden chairs in the late August warmth, and Constance Hargrove told Poirot about the 30-year secret that had not, in the end, been connected to her husband's death. It was a simpler thing than Poirot had imagined. An arrangement made in 1908, before her marriage, for the management of a family difficulty. Her own family, not the Hargroves, that Sir Edmund had recently discovered in the course of reviewing the family finances. He had said nothing to her directly, but she had known that he knew,
and she had been waiting since the spring to have the conversation that his death had made impossible. He would have been angry, she said. He was a man who was angry about deceptions, even the small ones, even the ones made for good reasons. He considered them, all of them, a form of cowardice. She paused. He was right, actually. I have been thinking about it for 2 months. He was right. But he did not tell you that he knew, said Poirot. He was waiting for me to tell him, she said, which I should have done 30 years ago. She looked at the rose she had been working on before he arrived. The difficulty about deceptions is not the deception itself. It is the maintenance of them. They require constant attention. They require you to remember at every moment what the truth is and what the version is. It is exhausting, and at the end,
You have the truth and the version, and neither one is the thing you actually wanted. What did you actually want? Said Poirot. She was quiet for a moment. To have told him the truth in 1908, she said, and to have discovered whether it mattered, whether it changed what happened afterward. A pause. I shall never know now. That is the thing about deceptions. You don't know what you lost until there is no possibility of finding it. Poirot nodded. He looked at the garden, the kitchen garden's vegetable rows, the wall with its espaliered fruit, the gate that led to the east garden. Through the gate, he could see the corner of the formal parterre, and beyond it, the opening of the yew-hedged path that led to the sculpture garden. The 3 sculptures, he said. They are removed? The restitution process is underway.
The Hoffman family. There is a granddaughter in Paris, a great-nephew in New York. The Neptune has already gone to Paris. The others will follow. She paused. The garden has gaps now. 3 gaps. You can see where they were. Yes, said Poirot. I imagine you can. I find, said Constance Hargrove with the directness of someone who has been examining a surprising discovery for 2 months, that the gaps are not worse than the sculptures were. They are different. The garden is different now. It knows more about itself than it did. She looked at the rose. Edmund would have said that was an improvement. He was always more comfortable with true things than beautiful ones, even when the true thing was less pleasant. Poirot was quiet for a moment. He thought about Sir Edmund, was scratching his last message into the gravel of his own garden with the last of his strength, pointing at the stone, pointing at the person, spending those final minutes not in any gesture of farewell, but in the specific, determined, entirely characteristic act of trying to ensure that the truth would survive him. He was, said Poirot, a remarkable man. He was, agreed Constance. He was also a difficult one. The 2 things were related. She rose, putting on her gardening gloves. Will you stay for tea, Monsieur Poirot? With great pleasure, said Poirot. He walked back through the kitchen garden gate and along the east garden path, past the ornamental pond, where the water lilies floated in the August warmth with the permanent indifference of things that do not keep records, and through the yew hedge gap into the sculpture garden. 3 spaces, 3 empty plinths, the stone marked where the bases of the sculptures had stood for decades, the Roman marbles on either side, the Georgian figures in their niches, the 2 modern works catching the late summer light, and at the far end of the central path, on her plinth of Purbeck stone, the Diana. She looked at Poirot as he approached, with her marble gaze of cold, focused intention. Bow raised, drapery in arrested motion. 400 years of looking at whatever stood before her with that specific quality of attention that knew, whatever else was true, exactly where it was aimed. Poirot stood before her for a moment. You knew, he said, to the marble goddess. You have been standing here for 200 years, knowing what was beneath your stone. Perhaps that is why Sir Edmund chose you, not for the hiding place, for the witness. He smoothed his moustaches. He put on his hat. He walked back through the garden toward the house where tea was waiting, and where the gaps in the garden were visible from the long gallery windows, and where the truth of the place, stripped of 2 of its most beautiful lies, was, as Sir Edmund had believed, and as Constance Hargrove was discovering, and as the garden itself had always known, sufficient. Les petites cellules grises rested,
for now.